And where to start? Well, let's start way up high with clouds. Clouds, beautiful, fluffy, soft pillows of cotton wool. What could possibly be bad about clouds, right? Well, it turns out, apparently, that they have rather a chronic surveillance problem. So when you are browsing the web, as you're browsing from site to site, the sites that you're on, as well as lots of other sites, are spying on you. They're spying on you as a matter of course. This is not a conspiracy. It's not something that a couple of malicious websites are doing. This is the business model of the World Wide Web. So this is how the web works, right? Sites spy on you. They give you things for free to get you there, and then they spy on you to build profiles of you, and they monetize that. But it's not just websites. Your everyday things are doing this as well. So what kind of things? Things like a teddy bear, for example. This is not just any bear. This is a Google bear. It's a bear with microphones in its ears and cameras in its eyes and speakers. So microphones that, for example, listen to your kids while they're playing with it and send that information to Google. Cameras that see your kids as it's playing and send that information to Google. Now this bear doesn't exist, right? This is just a patent. But it does show you the direction in which Google are thinking about things. A toy that does exist, that does something similar, is Hello Barbie. Does anyone have a Hello Barbie doll, or for their kids, or anyone? No? So lovely, lovely doll. Now, Hello Barbie listens to your kid and can speak back to your kid. Isn't that cute? That's really cute, right? So one of the creators said, I imagined a girl, I don't know why it has to be a girl, apparently it's a girl, taking the new doll into her bedroom and closing the door. How intimate. I have no doubt she will ask Barbie all manner of those intimate questions that she wouldn't ask an adult. Isn't this great? It's like a personal confidant, right? And then she goes on. Whatever someone said to Barbie would be recorded and transmitted via Wi-Fi to the computer servers of Toy Talk. So this was the article that I'm quoting from, same article. So when you're talking to Barbie, you're not talking to Barbie. You're talking to Toy Talk Incorporated, which is a corporation, right? So it would be analyzed, speech recognition software would analyze it and respond. So this isn't just the case with toys. Today, everything from your smart television to these devices that we wear on ourselves, right, the quantified self, to the cars that we drive, or pretty soon the cars that will drive us, collect information, data about us, right? And this is just a fact of life. This is not the problem itself. This is how modern technologies work. Now the question, though, the important question, is who owns and controls this data and these technologies? Now if the answer to that question is us as individuals, we own and control this technology and this data, then there's no problem. We have a democracy. Everything's good, right? If, however, the answer is that corporations and by extension governments own and control this data, then we have a very different type of social system. We have what you would call a corporatocracy. So this looks like a decision that we need to make about technology, right? Who owns and controls the technology and the data. But it's not a decision we need to make. So don't worry about it. Because this is a decision that we made several decades ago. Today, all of our data and technology are owned and controlled by corporations. And all of our information is thereby accessible to governments as well. So we are... Oops, I've just totally ripped this microphone off. And let's put that back on. There we go. So we're here. We're living in a corporatocracy today. We hear about the cloud, right? We hear about server farms. That's where the cloud lives, right? There's no such thing as a cloud, right? It's somebody else's computers, right? In this case, maybe Google's computers or Facebook's computers. We call them server farms. Have you ever stopped to ask yourselves what it is that is being farmed? Because if you do, you might quickly reach the conclusion that it's us. We are what Google and Facebook and these other Silicon Valley companies farm, right? So when, for example, Google improves its products, it's not to make something better for you. It's not to make a better product for you. It's kind of like the massage that we give to Kobe beef. It's not for the benefit of the cow. It's to make the cow a better product. Right? So we're what's being farmed here. And if you think that that's too much of a stretch maybe, here's a tiny little example. So this is me going to Forbes.com, and on the right you see Mozilla Lightbeam, which shows you all of the connections that are happening. And if you look over here, Forbes, before the first door slam that they have, has actually left the screen, has exposed me to 50 third-party sites. Right? One site. And it's loading. It's still loading, right? And I'm just scrolling around. And right now, it's exposed me to 73 third-party sites. So I've gone to one site, right? But right now, 80 other sites know about me and are tracking me. Right? You didn't probably bargain for that. You went to Forbes because you wanted to read maybe what Forbes has to say. I don't know why you'd do that. It's Forbes, but maybe you did, And at this point, 84 third-party sites. So you went to one site, and you have been exposed to 84 third-party sites. Third-party sites being other companies, right, who want to know about you. It's interesting. And if you try to protect yourself from this using, say, a content blocker, this is what you get on Forbes. It says, thank you for visiting. We noticed you have an ad blocker enabled. Please disable it. Okay? The first time they asked this of people, and people disabled it. I'll take questions in a second. And people disabled it. What they got were malvertising, malicious advertising. So around February of this year, there was a huge amount of computers that were taken over by malvertising and encrypted for ransom, right? Which came out of ads. So please stop protecting yourself, is what they're saying, right? And just in case you think that irony is not lost on Forbes, look at the quote that comes up here. There's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all. I find that very, very ironic on this screen. I'll take questions at the end, but if you had a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, like if you, for some reason, want to read a Forbes article, you can actually disable it in, I don't know what's called, like Firebug, like when you can change the source code.
Yes, if you have the technical knowledge, you can hack it. Exactly. So if you have the technical knowledge, you can block it. And we'll get to how maybe mere mortals can do that as well going forward. Exactly. So it's not just Forbes. Here's Wired. Here's the thing with ad blockers. We get it. Ads are not what you're here for, but ads help us keep the lights on. So either whitelist us, turn your blocker off, or pay us $1 a week, which sounds like fair, right? It's fair, right? I mean, they just want $1 a week if you don't want to be tracked. Only the thing is, if you give them $1 a week, it doesn't stop the tracking, right? It stops the ads. And that's what we need to separate here. This isn't about advertising. As much as you might find advertising to be, obtrusive and annoying, what's really sinister about this is that it's behavioral advertising, which means that they have to study your behavior, which means that they profile you. And this goes far beyond advertising, as we'll see in a second. So I think this is a very, very sad place to be in terms of the potential of the web, especially given where it began, right? I think we can do better than this. In fact, we must do better than this because this isn't just some first world problem, right? Our technology affects our society and our society affects our technology. So we're trying. And by we, just so you don't think I'm talking about some huge company that's, trying to push a product out there or something. By me, I mean Laura and myself and our husky, right? We're Ind.ie, and so we set up a social enterprise with a social mission of trying to fix this problem. And the problem really is one of social justice in the digital age. And how are we trying to fix it? Well, through doing things differently, through ethical design, which is the topic of this talk. So what's ethical design? Well, ethical design looks a little like this. We take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, and adapt it for our needs. And at the very base, when you're designing things, the things that you design should respect human rights. This isn't rocket science, right? All right, but we can't stop there. We also need to respect human effort in the things that we do. Now, why is this so important? Well, we have free and open source software, right, which is built to respect human rights. But so often we stop there and we fail at respecting human effort, right? We say, oh, is it not easy to use? Send us a pull request. And only certain people can send or know what pull requests are. But if we respect human effort, we don't stop there either. We can also go beyond that to respect human experience. This is a very, very simple model, right? And it's not about building products that either do this or do that or do this. It's about having a cross-section of this. So what does it mean to respect human rights? What kind of products respect human rights? Products that are decentralized, private, free and open, interoperable, accessible, secure, and sustainable. These are the products that respect human rights. What about respecting human effort? Well, we have to make sure that they're functional and convenient and reliable, that they work. We get all of this, and then let's think about making them delightful also, right? Let's add layered delight, because the experiences that we have with people and with products matter. They're the only things we have in life, and then we die. Right? As the people who create experiences, we have a profound responsibility to make sure that those experiences don't take people's lives for granted. So this is what we call ethical design. And we have a manifesto, which you can print out and you can put up if you agree with it, of course. And people have used this for various things. So you can find it at Ind.ie, Ind.ie/ethical-design. And people are putting them up. It's up in Amsterdam at the offices of Philips. This is not that. It's up in agencies. It's an agency where the Ethical Design Manifesto is up. And people have actually said, I've used this to not work on a project at an agency. I work at an agency, and I said, look, we're violating the base of the pyramid. I'm not comfortable working on this. This is how we change things, slowly, right? Academics are using it as a theoretical device in some of their research. So reading the Ethical Design Manifesto made us reflect on methods and practices we use within the human-computer interaction community. How do these ideas of ethical design translate to our field? These are two academics from the University of Leuven. Here's Clemens Schulster, who wrote to me to say, look, thanks for putting this up there. I used it in a discussion with a high policymaker at the EU in Brussels, and it was helpful. We need these simple frameworks for thinking about what we do. Because really, like I said, these questions of ethics, you don't need an ethicist or whatever. You don't need a philosopher. The questions of ethics that we're talking about and the ethics that we're failing today in technology are kindergarten ethics. We're not talking about some nuance of deep philosophical ethics here. We're failing kindergarten ethics. That's where we need to do better. Right? So ethical design. Where are we failing? We're failing at the base of the pyramid. In Silicon Valley, in centralized technologies, in venture capital funded centralized technologies, we are building things that do not respect human rights. And when you do that, everything else takes on a different hue, right? You're not talking about ethical design anymore. You're talking about dark design. You're not talking about building things that empower people. You're talking about building things on the backs of people. And this is how modern technologies, mainstream technologies, are built today. And when they talk about the delightful aspects, and when they talk about the cute, beautiful aspects, it is as an illusion to take your attention away, to distract you from the fact that they're actually farming you. This is dark design. You might want to call it Silicon Valley design. It's pretty much the same thing. But one thing about it is that it is unethical. And it's not unethical as a bug. We're not talking about errors and mistakes that people are making. Oh, maybe Google messed up again, or Facebook. How many times does Facebook mess up, right? They keep messing up, doing things that are entirely in line with their business model, but against your interests, right? Messing up. And then we find out about them. We go, Facebook, why'd you do this? This is terrible. You're infringing my privacy. Oh, we're really sorry. Yeah, we messed up. We won't do it again. It's very convenient that they keep messing up in a way that benefits their bottom line and their core business model, right? This is not a bug, and we have to stop seeing them as bugs. This is part of a system where we have the combination of centralized wealth and centralized information. Now, we've always had centralized wealth in the system that we call capitalism, right? It is about the centralization of wealth and the accumulation of wealth. Now, what happens when you add to that accumulation of wealth the accumulation of information? Well, you get what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. And it is just that. And that's what's different about our era versus the previous eras. Technology is an amplifier. It doesn't matter what it doesn't care about what it amplifies. It can amplify your ideology or my ideology, but it amplifies it. And the ideology that it's amplified today is capitalism. And the way that we've done it is through surveillance. So this is a very interesting topic. And you might be thinking, well, what has this got to do with anything? You know, it's like, is this really like what technology is leading to? How is this related to technology? Or what is the core problem that we're trying to solve? So let me try and tie it in there with a number. 62. Does anyone know what this number is? It's quite an unremarkable number, right? 62. If you're following the Oxfam reports, Oxfam is a charity in the UK that fights poverty. 62 is a number that they released in January of this year. 62 is the number of people in the world who have as much wealth, together, the 62, as much wealth as half of the world's poorest population combined. So 62 people have as much wealth today in the world as 3.5 billion people. Now, if you're wondering why we're building technologies in a certain way, if you're wondering why we have the refugee crisis, if you're wondering why we have climate change happening, and you want it in a nutshell, this is it. Systemic inequality. Inequality at a rate that you cannot comprehend, right? Because certain things we can comprehend. This is 62 as a number. We can visualize it, we can understand it, we can internalize it. 62 people would fit into one double-decker bus in London with space left over. Now, I want all of you to try and visualize 3.5 billion. You can't. We're not wired that way. It's so far beyond the Dunbar number that we can't even visualize it. And that, in a nutshell, is systemic inequality. This is the core problem we're trying to solve. It's not a technology problem. It's a capitalism problem that we're trying to solve. Now, how does this tie into technology? Well, what if you are one of these 62 people? What should you do? I mean, congratulations, first of all, success, right? But what should you do? Well, for one thing, there are a lot of people out there that don't have much, right? So it would probably be prudent if you built some walls around you, just thick and tall as much as you can, right? Just because they might be up to no good, right? So we don't want them to get to us. But then also, maybe it's a good idea if they are up to no good that we keep an eye on them, right? We should probably be watching what they're doing, right? Just so we know that they're all calm and fine where they are, right? Is this starting to look like something that you saw from before? Maybe if we remove this bit and just, oh, there's our cloud. Ah, so it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Surveillance in this system that we have. So maybe that's okay. A lot of us are all right with the concept of an all-seeing, all-knowing white guy who lives on a cloud, right? A lot of people are okay with this concept, apparently, I hear. That's what I'm told. So maybe we'd be okay with the concept of another, less magical, all-seeing white guy who lives on a cloud. Is it too much of a stretch? I don't think so. At least I know that Mark Zuckerberg exists. Hey, maybe it's comforting to me. And of course, there is no cloud, right? When we talk about the cloud, we're talking about other people's computers, other people's machines, right? Which exist to farm us. Now, if this sounds familiar as a business, it's because we've had it before. Farming people and selling people has been a very lucrative business in the past. The difference is we used to do it with people's bodies, right? And we call that slavery. And unfortunately, it still exists in many parts of the world, more than you might think. So we call that slavery. I think in our industry especially, we're at a point where we have to ask ourselves the very inconvenient and quite disturbing question of what do we call the business of owning everything else about a person that makes them who they are, apart from their physical body? We don't care about owning physical bodies anymore. That's quite, it's quite rude, isn't it? But the business model of mainstream technology is to own everything else about you and to monetize it. What do we call that? Whatever we choose to call it, we can probably agree that it is a colonial mentality, right? There are those of us that are in the know, the white man with the fire, and we bring the fire, right? With terms and conditions attached, little asterisks. It's always terms and conditions attached when the white man brings the fire. So where's the white man bring the fire today? Well, we talked about Mark Zuckerberg, right? How many of you have heard of Free Basics? Free Basics is Facebook's philanthropic, because they are a charity, as you know, attempt to bring internet to those parts of the world that don't have the internet. They're trying to do so much good. Mark's like some saint. It's amazing. And there is an asterisk, and there are terms and conditions attached, right? When they say the internet, they don't really mean the internet. They kind of mean Facebook and a few more sites that are handpicked by Facebook. And it means that when you use their internet, the Facebook net, Facebook gets to know everything that you're doing there, which is their core business model. So, okay. And India, thankfully, they weren't stupid about it, right? They said no. They said, look, just because we're poor doesn't mean that we deserve a second-rate internet that is watched over by you. They kind of rejected God. I don't know, it's quite heretical if you think about it. And what did Silicon Valley do in response to this? Well, I think it can be summarized by they collectively lost their shit. That's a technical term. So here's Mark Andreessen. I don't know how you say his name. But he is one of the biggest venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And he tweeted, "Anti-colonialism has been economically catastrophic for the Indian people for decades. Why stop now?" He's on the board of Facebook as well. Have you guys heard of this term before, anti-colonialism? It's a beautiful term, right? It's these people, for some reason, who are against colonialism. The ones who are being colonized, but it's like, what the heck? It's against their interests, apparently, according to Mark, right? So we're talking about colonialism here. We're talking about imperialism, a digital imperialism. So that's the problem. And if I haven't depressed you right now, if I was to stop, you'd probably say, okay, well, this is a terrible place to leave it, right? Because I probably have depressed you. So what about solutions? Well, the problem is a broad spectrum problem, right? We tied it back all the way to the roots of our socioeconomic system, which is where it originates from. So what about the solutions? Well, the solutions have to be broad spectrum as well. They have to be legislative, right? And before we can legislate, though, we have to actually understand the core of the problem. And the core of the problem harkens back to what the self is in the digital age, the nature of the self. So this is you, okay? And this is how we have traditionally drawn the boundaries of the self, of the person, around your biological borders, right? And over many, many years and over many, many struggles, we've been able to build a body of legislation as well as how, the means to execute on that legislation through a judiciary system, where we know what the rights of the self are. They may or may not be upheld to the same degree in different parts of the world or even within the same part of the world. But we have a very good idea of what it means to protect the self and to protect the human and human rights, right? We have a whole body of this. So here's the issue. The problem is when this little thing comes into the picture, right? Our familiar little smartphone, for example. Now, what is the nature of our interaction with technology, like the smartphone? Is it, as Steve Krug would say, for example, don't make me think, Steve Krug, is it one of master and butler? So do we say, hey, let's say that I have an idea and I want to write it down. Do I say, hey, I have this idea, phone, please write it down. And the phone says, sure, of course I will, and writes it down, right? So do we have two actors talking to each other? Is that the nature of technology? We think about it like that a lot, right? Communication between two actors. If this is the case, the nature of surveillance is kind of what surveillance has always been. Message capture, signals capture between two actors. You may or may not agree with it, but that's what surveillance really is, right? And that's traditionally what it's been. But what if our relationship with technology is actually different? What if, when I have an idea, and I want to store that idea somewhere, right? What I do is I take that idea, and I extend my mind, I extend myself by storing that idea on the phone. Thereby, the phone becomes an extension of myself. Just like I could keep that idea in my brain, I extend my brain, and I keep it on the phone. Now, if this is the relationship that we have with technology, if we use technology to extend our biological capabilities, then it would make perfect sense to extend the boundaries of the self to include the technologies by which we extend the self. Now, in this case, what does surveillance become? Surveillance is no longer signals capture. Surveillance is an assault on the self. And, as we saw previously, we already have a body of laws and a body of rules and the means to execute upon them to protect the self. So, we have to start thinking about the nature of the self, and perhaps that we must extend person rights to the technologies that we extend ourselves with. So that's the nature of the self. What about data? We've been talking about data a lot, and you've probably heard it called many things. An asset, right? Who's heard data as an asset? Big asset. We have what are we going to do with all our data, right? The new oil, has anyone heard that one? That's a really nice one. New oil, yeah, you're a bit hesitant to put your hand up, but yeah, I've heard that as well. When I hear that, it's disgusting. And here's why. It's because we don't understand the nature of data. Now, let's say I have a statue, a tiny little statue, right? If I have enough information about this statue, I can take a 3D printer and I can create a replica of this statue. Now think about what I can do if I have enough information about you. Now, I'm not here to 3D print you, and neither is Google or Facebook. But I do want to profile you. I do want to simulate you. And that's what profiles are. And the more fidelity we have, the better our algorithms get, the better artificial intelligence gets. The moment we have quantum computing at a feasible level, that's what they're going to be used for, to simulate you even better. Why? Because just as you saw with the statue and the 3D printer, if I have enough data about a thing, I start approaching the thing itself and having the thing itself. That's where we're heading. This is not about advertising. Advertising is just the first symptom. It's what we can see. So we have to understand that data about a thing, if you have enough of it, becomes the thing. So if we're talking about personal data and data about people, what we're talking about is people. So if we're talking about monetizing data and selling data, we're talking about monetizing and selling people. Let's know what business we're in if that's what we're doing. Personal data is people. So that's legislation. What about regulation? If our rights are being trampled upon today by these corporations, we must regulate them to protect it. If there's a systematic violation of our rights, which there is, we can't just say, oh, we'll just let it sort itself out. As Desmond Tutu says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. In this analogy, Silicon Valley is the elephant and we are the mouse as individuals. So those with the remit to protect our freedoms cannot remain neutral in this. So why aren't we regulating? Could it have anything to do with the fact that the very people that we choose to protect our rights act like cheerleaders for the industry? The very people that should be protecting us right now say things like net neutrality is a Taliban-like issue. This is Oettinger, Vice President of the Digital Single Market in the European Union. And he thinks that people who care about net neutrality are like the Taliban. Could that have anything to do with Oettinger's donut? That's his donut there. This is information about all of the meetings that he's had with lobbyists. And the red are corporate lobbyists that he's talked to. And these are NGOs and other little people. And all of the corporate ones are telecommunications companies. So when Oettinger and his group passed a law recently that basically destroys net neutrality in Europe, whose interests was it in? Could it possibly have been in the interests of his donut? Maybe. We call these things public-private partnerships, right? We call them multi-stakeholderism. Has anyone heard of this? If you're not in the policy circles, multi-stakeholderism is a great term. Politicians and policymakers can say, we want to bring everyone with a stake to the table so we can all sit and we can talk about this, right? Like friends. And it sounds like such a great idea until you realize that different people have different sized stakes. So for example, when I was at the Internet Governance Forum in Istanbul, some of us had to get together whatever little money we had to be there. And some of us, like Google, had a big tent outside, a literal big tent. So their stake was so big you could actually put a tent around it and have parties in it, right? So it sounds great until you realize that Google and Facebook can be at every stakeholder meeting around the world at the same time, whereas people who are trying to defend human rights, for example, cannot afford to maybe go to more than one or two because they don't have the resources. We call this co-regulation. Google, tell us, how should we regulate you on privacy, right? And they go, oh, we have a few ideas. Thank you for asking us. My friend will now, display our position on this in a pie chart. Whatever we call it, I think it's time to call it by what it is, or whatever we've been calling it. That is institutional corruption, right? An economy of influence. The effect of corporate finance in public policy making. Corruption, but institutional. Not the kind of corruption that you can see very easily as in, oh, here's some money under the table for you. Yeah, thank you. what if the system's built on influence of money in public policy making? This is such an important issue that Lawrence Lessig, who is the founder of Creative Commons, decided to run for the presidency of the United States earlier last year on this one issue, to remove the influence of corporate finance from public policy making so that we are not rendered unable to regulate. And of course, the Democratic Party just had a fit, and they said, no, you can't even join any debates. What are you, I'm like, Bernie Sanders? And then Bernie Sanders came along, and they must have had a heart attack. But they've shut him up too, so that's fine, I guess. So this is institutional corruption. And we have right now in the works trade deals, secretive trade deals, like the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, and TPP. And if these pass, what we're talking about is the ceiling of institutional corruption as part of the law, right? Where we can't change that at that point. Where corporations, through things called investor-state dispute settlement clauses, will get vetoes on democratic governments when they elect to protect their citizens if those laws that they have erected are against the interests of corporations and their investors. Already this has been used by the tobacco lobbies in Canada, for example, to get hundreds of millions of dollars in damages from democratic governments for protecting their people against tobacco. Already. And we're on the verge, if we don't do something about it, of these becoming law, where it's going to be very difficult to change that. And, we're not blameless in the privacy community itself. There was a conference recently called CPDP, Computers, Privacy, and Data Protection. You'd think with a name like that, this is like, these people care about privacy, they're protecting us, right? And they asked me to be on the closing keynote with the president of the European Parliament and Mark Rothenberg and Shoshana Zuboff, and I was like, that's such a big honor, not the president of the European Parliament, but Shoshana Zuboff and Mark Rothenberg, people I really respect. I was like, sure. And then I looked on their site, and here are their sponsors. Facebook, Microsoft, keep going, Google, the United States mission to the European Union. I guess the NSA was unavailable that day. And Palantir. Do you know what Palantir does, guys? Do you know what Palantir is? What it was named after? Any Lord of the Rings fans in the house? Yeah? The all-seeing eye of the evil wizard, Sauron. They're not even hiding it, right? That's what they do. That's their job. And so I said, no. I said, what the fuck? What am I going to be saying if I stand in front of the banners of these people whose business, core business, not some conspiracy, just how they make their money is to violate people's privacy, right? And say, I'm willing to talk about privacy in this context. And I'm legitimizing them. Because in this case, we have a very small group of people who have legitimacy in this area, and that's really important. They want it, and they get it. Open Whisper Systems. Marlon, he makes an app for communicating. It's probably the only one that I would recommend that you use that if you care about your privacy. Signal. Huge amount of legitimacy. What do they do with it, though? How do they make their money? Signal is free. They implement the encryption for other companies, like WhatsApp. And then WhatsApp, and Facebook owns WhatsApp, of course, gets beautiful public relations like this, gets privacy boost, right, with end-to-end encryption. Okay, that's cool. And now this year, they completed it, and it was a huge amount of noise around it. And we saw articles like, forget Apple versus the FBI, WhatsApp just switched on encryption for 1 billion people, which sounds amazing. Thank you, WhatsApp. You guys rock, right? Until you stop for a second and think, how does Facebook make money? How do they make money? If Facebook didn't know anything about you, what would happen to Facebook? They go bankrupt, because that's how they make money. So what's happening here, right? In the articles, we saw things like, Marlon Spike is a well-known idealist, and so are the app engineers at these places, and such great publicity, right? Such amazing publicity. Bruce Schneier, one of the most respected security researchers, end-to-end encrypted. WhatsApp is now end-to-end encrypted. Okay, so where's the catch? Metadata. Who are you talking to? When are you talking to them? Right? I love this comment on that post. Metadata is the name of the game, and end-to-end encryption is the honeypot. Right? It's what gets you to trust it. Right? And how important is metadata? Well, according to the former CIA director, they kill people based on it. Right? The drone strikes that you hear about, that's not necessarily about the content of the communication. It's knowing who spoke to whom when and how often. So we ourselves have to stop being useful idiots. The only reason they employ Marlin to implement it is not because Facebook doesn't know how to implement end-to-end encryption. It's not because Google, he did it for Google as well, and it's off by default. Isn't that great? Did you guys know that did you know that you could end-to-end encrypt your Gmail? So Google can't see it? You just have to download an extension, like a Chrome extension, and you have to turn it on. Do they know that 0.01% of people are going to do that? Yeah. Public relations, right? Like Bruce Schneier said, the NSA didn't wake up and say, let's just spy on everybody. They looked up and said, wow, corporations are spying on everybody. Let's get ourselves a cut. So it doesn't just stop at the corporations. This is how governments get your data as well. The solutions have to be financial. Right? Mainstream technology is subsidized by venture capital. That's why it's centralized. It's not some magic, occurrence. It's because it's subsidized by venture capital, and venture capital is centralized. So here's how it works. Our bright-eyed young Mark Zuckerberg has a startup, right? He wants to connect the world, not to each other, to Facebook, but he wants to connect the world, right? So he goes to a venture capitalist. That's a photo. They actually look like that. And he says to the venture capitalist, hey, in 5 years' time, I'm going to have 500 million people maybe using my thing, right? That's my goal. I want to have a few 100 million people using it. How much money will you give me today for when we sell those people, right? Either on the open market, an IPO, or to another company with the same business model. The venture capitalist says, all right, Mark, I trust you. You seem like a trustworthy guy. I'll give you this much because I think you might be able to do it. I've also hedged my bets. I've also put, if it's 5 million, I put 5 million on 9 others. This is gambling, right? It's Vegas, basically. I put 5 million on 10 other companies, right? 50 million. Now, what I need is for one of those to become $1 billion, we call them unicorns, right? $1 billion unicorn, and I get my money back. I don't care about losing 45 million, right? I just need one of them. Now, the only way any one of those can become $1 billion unicorn is with one business model, selling people. That's the only one where you make that sort of money that quickly. So he knows he's going to get a lot more if he's successful, and that's the sale. In venture capital, the sale happens at the very beginning, not the end. If someone's taking venture capital, you can be sure that they've sold you because that's how they got the money, right? So if you see a new startup saying, hey, we're creating a new social network, it's so cool, help us build it, because we helped them build it, right? When Twitter came along, we helped Twitter become Twitter. Until Twitter didn't need us anymore. The network effects kicked in, and then they said, well, any one of you leaving, 100 of you leaving, doesn't mean anything anymore. So you've lost your power to do anything. This is the only point you could have killed Facebook if you wanted to, right? Beyond this, when network effects kick in, we have no power anymore. So that's the sale. Venture capitalist goes away. Now, this is the task that Mark has. He needs to convince us that he hasn't sold us so that we can actually put our photos in there, put our messages in there, right? And that he will never sell us, right? And if he can do that, then he can reach that network effect that he needs. So he's very convincing, and that's the con. This is a very, very predictable cycle, people. It's, again, not rocket science. Very, very simple. And then, a few years later, the venture capitalist comes back, and we have an IPO or an acquisition. Another company with the same business model buys it. So if we want alternatives, we have to find alternative ways of funding it. If someone tells you, oh, I'm building a privacy-respecting network or whatever, and I've just taken venture capital, do not believe a word of what they're saying, because they don't even have that control. Even if they would want to have that control, they might be naive or know exactly what they're doing, but they don't have the control. And the alternatives can be technological. So there's a reason this comes at the end, because normally In our community, we like to think there must be a technical solution to this and we'll just fix it with technical solutions. We can't. Without all the other stuff, best case scenario, the people who have the technical alternatives will be in jail in 5 years' time. That could be us with what we're doing. So this is where design comes into it, right? And by design, I don't mean decoration. I don't mean aesthetics. I mean everything that makes a thing what it is and the process of coming to what that should be. So we have Silicon Valley design. Silicon Valley design looks something like this. It's very tasty. It looks beautiful. You just want to take it and you just want to eat it, right? It's just so lovely, right? And you get addicted to it as well. In fact, there's a whole book on it. It's called Hooked by ar.al, right? The subtitle is How to Build Habit-Forming Products. This is not a warning. This is an instruction manual, right? Just like we've taken 1984 not to be a warning, but an instruction manual. They wrote it as an instruction manual. All design, for those of you who are designers, you must understand this, is influence, right? But design without ethics is manipulation. It's decoration. Decoration is what we do if we have something that tastes bitter and we want to mask the taste. If we have something that we know is unpalatable, but we decorate it to try and get people to swallow it anyway, right? That's decoration. That's not design. Don't mix those two things up, because a lot of people think they're designing and they're really decorating. Design is what alters the status quo for the better. Changing things isn't our goal. Changing things, hopefully, in a progressive manner should be our goal. So there are people who say they do this, free and open source design, right? Very a burgeoning field. And it looks something like this. This is free and open source design, if you've ever done it. And it's got the best of ideals, and it starts with the best of ideals. And at some point, we even have a UI maybe that we add to it, and then we add some preferences to that UI, and then we just want to extend it a little bit, and sometimes that causes problems. But, other times it's really great because we can do such amazing things with it, that you never thought that you could do. You just have to watch out for the pitfalls. And it just keeps growing and just becoming so beautiful, the stubs. And you have so much choice. You could have the blue little bulb or a red bulb if you want a red bulb, or maybe don't have that one. I don't know. That seems kind of sad. And it's just awesome. That one's problematic. And if only someone could add that missing piece. There we go. And that's free and open source design. Right? We have a problem in the free and open source world. In that, you might look at this and go, yeah, no one would ever want to use that, man. What are you on, right? That's not true. For the people who built it, this is a great solution. And they love tinkering with it. Just like you would want to tinker with some classic car that you have on the weekends, because that's your hobby. You don't want to drive that classic car to work every day, possibly, right? But whenever that classic car breaks down, you love tinkering with it. That's the free and open source world. They're enthusiasts. They love doing it. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're not going to magically create things that are beautiful experiences for everyday people who want everyday things, right? And there's a diversity problem. It's usually a lot of middle-aged white guys and not much else, right? So they're creating a lot of solutions for other technically minded middle-aged white guys, which is entirely to be expected. If they were magically creating solutions for certain vulnerable groups within society who have nothing to do, who have nothing in common with them, then we'd be very surprised and we'd be like, wow, that's amazing. How'd you do that? How'd you know what they needed? And I guess at its core, really, free and open source says, look, here's an amazing chainsaw. Look at this chainsaw. Isn't it an amazing chainsaw? Take the chainsaw and use it. And you're there saying, but I just want a knife to butter my bread. And when you say that, they go, no, this chainsaw is so much better than your knife. You just don't know how to use it. And you're just like, I don't want to cut myself. It's a chainsaw. I just need a... This is the problem that we have. With free and open source, we get this bit, right? But we don't understand that design is holistic, that it needs to be a cross-section, that we have to care about the effort. And we have to care about the experience. So I know I'm running a little over, and I know that you have pizza, but is it worth it? Are we going to keep going for a couple more minutes? Okay. Because this is great. And talking about it is great. And that's all I've been doing to you right now. But what does it look like in practice? Because we're not just talking about it. There's nothing wrong with just talking about it, but that's not where it comes from. All of this comes from practice. So we need to do two things in practice. One, we need to block the abuses of the mainstream. Technologically, again, we're talking. We need to do it with regulation and legal aspects as well, but we can block it technologically. And two, we need to create convenient alternatives that don't have this business model. So how we're doing this, our little tiny effort, is we just launched an app called Better, which is a content blocker on iOS for iPhone and iPad. And it blocks the abuses of the current mainstream, right? It blocks trackers. It's not an ad blocker. It is a tracker blocker. It's a web malware blocker. And that's really important because we need to frame these conversations correctly as well. It's free and open source, so you can go to source.ind.ie and you can download it and you can run it yourself on your own iPhone, build it in Xcode if you want to, right? But it's also available as a seamless experience for sale, which is hopefully how we're going to sustain ourselves by actually doing what we do, not working for Google in the morning and then coming home and doing free and open source at night. Although, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but we perpetuate the system. It's available for sale, and people are actually buying it, even though they can get it for free. Convenience, right? That's what we're betting on. We're trying to build an everyday thing here. And it's available on the web. So you can go to the website and you can start looking at all of the data that we have, all of the information on the trackers that we have. And this is what it does, basically. By stopping tracking, it's also saving you bandwidth and data and saving you time as well. And people seem to like it. We have a 5-star review over about 50 reviews or something now on the App Store, and we launched it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago. And again, I can't stress this enough. We are a 2-person and 1 husky social enterprise. Now that matters because that affects the design of everything. It means, for example, remember the wired blocker? The ad blocker? Well, we're blocking it. So we have a content blocker in there that blocks them, right? And we went out and we you know, it got a lot of retweets, etc. 700, 800 retweets there and likes. Only one tech publishing site covered it, even though we actually have personal friends at The Guardian, at other newspapers, etc., because of what we've been doing for several years now. None of them. Could that have anything to do with the fact that they have the same business model? Don't know. So, but it means that we can actually go out and we can say, look, we're working for us, individuals, right? If you look at AdBlock Plus, if you look at Ghostery, this is the reason we built this. Because looking out there at the existing solutions, AdBlock Plus and Ghostery came out of the advertising industry. They were advertising companies that said, hey, there's an opportunity here. With Ghostery, what if we built a blocker, right? An ad blocker, but we're an advertising company, and if we didn't block our own tracker, we could make some money with that by selling that tracker to people, right? AdBlock Plus goes to Google and says, hey, we've made an acceptable ads policy, Google. You want to be on it? You can be acceptable. You just have to give us a few million. Extortion. Fucking hell. Right? But we can actually do it for the right reasons, and that's what we're trying. So here's an open letter to Wired, and we're telling them, look, you're being short-sighted. Here's our blocking rule in Markdown, right? That's blocking your blocker. So your move, right? And they can then inline their JavaScript to break our blocker. Maybe a blocker. But then at some point, they will piss us off so much that we will remove them from the web. Because we can actually remove every link to Wired from the web. So the end game is we win. And if they don't respect our rights as individuals, that's what's going to happen at some point. We've actually taken a stand against the Interactive Advertising Bureau. They have a deal, which is what Wired was following. So the whole trade lobby is actually telling every website to do this. Here in Sweden, I think next month, all of the publishers are going to get together and they're going to block your ad blockers and your content blockers. All of them have agreed. This is collusion. This is monopoly, basically. And they're going to get sued for it. I'm pretty sure of it, right? But that is the way that they're approaching this. It's crazy. So we have I wrote a little script, goes out, looks at the top domains from Alexa, and finds all the trackers. This is how we do what we do. And then we go and we say, look, here's what they do. We actually write informative articles that you might want to read, even with little comments, like little humorous comments, so it's not just a dry database. And this is all freely available on the web, so look it out. I mean, even if you want to learn more about it, look at it. And we find interesting things. So how bad do you think the worst site on the web is today? How bad? How many trackers do you think they have? Anyone? Come on. 300, you said. You're not an optimist. Do you think 300 or is that too much? 500. Okay, you guys are actually, you're really pessimistic. 172. But that's 172 trackers on one site, right? One site. So these companies also have to sell what they do, right? How many page views they have. This site, LifeBuzz, has 250 million page views a month. They also want to sell the statistics, right? So we just use their statistics. 82% are on mobile. We know what percentage of mobile users, it's not here, but they also tell you what percentage are in the US, right? Using those statistics, we were able to calculate that the 172 trackers, right, cost people something like 600 terabytes of data and maybe around 300, 400 terabytes of mobile data in the US alone. And we were able to calculate the cost of that based on the average gigabyte cost of data. So that site, that one site, costs just Americans, because that's what we had the statistics for, about how much they pay, over $4 million a month in mobile data charges just to load their trackers. It's $4 million of data charges wasted on loading the trackers in just one country on people who are on mobile for this one site. Now think about that. Think about how much it slows down your experience. I haven't calculated that yet, but we're going to. How many lifetimes are we losing because of this business model of people actually waiting for things longer than they should have to, right? And if you're thinking, oh well, these people are maybe an outlier or something, no. Axel Springer, the biggest publisher in Germany, sued AdBlock Plus, and their lawyers actually said this: the core business of the plaintiff is to deliver ads to its visitors. They're the biggest publisher, one of the biggest publishers in Europe. Journalistic content is just a vehicle to get readers to view the ads. The ads, sorry. This is their lawyer, the publisher's lawyer, saying this. We have a word for this. It's called bait. And what happens if the free press today becomes bait? If that's our free press, because it's based on this business model. It's not all doom and gloom, right? We also have a cloud of fame. There's a deck network, an advertising network that doesn't in any way track people. They just show one little unobtrusive ad on one corner, and they say, we don't even want to know you. We're fine with not knowing you. We don't track you. They don't have a single tracker on their website. So that's better. That's step one. Block abuses. We're trying to do the best we can with that. Step two, build convenient alternatives. So it's been in pre-alpha for 7 or 8 months. We haven't touched it since we were working on better. We don't have the money to work on it right now. But we actually have started building a decentralized social network that is a beautiful experience for everyday people. Again, free and open source. And then it will be available for sale or with subscriptions as well, hopefully, when it's ready. But it's a beautiful experience. And it has to be. Because if you think that we can build alternatives and people will use them because they're private or they respect their human rights, you are wrong. The only reason they're going to use them is because they're convenient. And hopefully they protect their human rights, and hopefully they're private, right? That's our challenge. So this is the whole thing of setting up an account on this network, including one extra step, which was for the pre-alpha, because we had to limit it in terms of access. And here we go. I'm on, and I can immediately share a photo that I want, for example, with my friends, or a little animated GIF with my friends, right? What's different about this? Entirely decentralized, peer-to-peer. It only goes from me to the person I'm talking to or the group I'm talking to, so I can actually have private conversations with people, and it's going from my machine to their machine. That isn't rocket science either. The reason you don't hear about this all the time, you hear about the cloud, is because it's in the business model interests of Silicon Valley. The alternatives have to be decentralized. They have to be zero knowledge, and that's what this is. We couldn't even spy on you if we wanted to because it never reaches us to begin with. So you don't have to trust us. And that should be the definition of trust, if you don't have to trust. So that's the other element. Create convenient alternatives. So in closing, we have to move beyond the cloud. The cloud is not the solution. You keep hearing about the cloud. You will keep hearing people talking about the cloud and how we have to invest in the cloud and build the cloud and make everything on the cloud. We have to move beyond the clouds. We need a new topology without privileged centers, an egalitarian topology, a decentralized topology. So when Facebook says the only way you can share your photo with a friend is if you share it with me first, we can say to Facebook, bullshit. If you want to share your photo with your friend, share it directly with your friend. You are unnecessary. We need to move beyond centralization. We can't do that if we are stuck in this total lack of imagination of thinking venture capital is the only way we can fund new enterprises. We need to move beyond, or at least stop worshiping at the altar of Silicon Valley. Remind yourselves one thing. I'm pretty sure none of you are American here. Anyone American? I'm sorry. But you are not. And this is an imperialistic model. Right? Just because we may look like them doesn't necessarily mean they have our best interests at heart. We need to be able to separate ourselves a little bit and say, what's good for us? Can we do things differently here? Maybe. And if we can, why not use that as competitive advantage? So let's stop worshiping at the altar of Silicon Valley. When Mark Zuckerberg says something is good for him, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. Let's move beyond colonialism in how we do things. As designers, we can either design in a colonialistic, anthropological, ethnographic way, us designing for the other, or we can make our institutions as diverse as we can, not because that will immediately, guarantee justice, no, but because by having a diverse group designing for itself, we can effectively design for a diverse audience without being colonialistic in our approach. It's the only way we can. And we have to move beyond privilege. It lies at the heart of all of these issues. Not ignoring it, but actually understanding it, maybe feeling that we're uncomfortable with it, and trying to see what a world would look like if we had not had that privilege to begin with. And that means moving beyond inequality. And in a nutshell, what we're talking about is moving beyond bullshit. Because this is what we've done. We've planted a bullshit seed. And we got a bullshit tree. And we climbed up, and now we're in the branches, and now we're wondering why the fruit tastes like bullshit. And there's a reason for that. Because bullshit fruit is the only type of fruit you get from a bullshit tree. Now, some of us who benefit from the system think that if they decorated the tree, it would mask the smell and the taste of the fruit. But it doesn't. Some of us who care about this feel that maybe if we prune some branches, we can change the nature of the tree. But we can't. It's still the same tree. So here's what I think we should do. We need to plant a new seed. And it needs to be based on the right things, on equality, on rationality, and on human rights and on democracy. And then we'll get a very different type of tree. One that we don't have to decorate if it's actually built on these foundations. And the fruits we get from it will be diverse. But we can't stop there. The key thing is, we have to build a bridge. A convenient, easy-to-cross bridge from our tree to the bullshit tree, so that those without the same convictions, without the same abilities, can join us on our tree. Because that is the bridge between the centralized world of old and the decentralized world that we must build. A world built on reason, on equality, on human rights, and on democracy. That is the world that I want to live in. That is the world that I believe we deserve as a species. And that is the world that I challenge us to build. Thank you.